Hello, it's Ben from Inspired Children here, and as it's National Storytelling Week, I thought I would share with you 5 of my favourite all-time books to read to young children. And I know there are hundreds of brilliant books for children, so please don't be offended if your favourite children's book is not on this list. And in fact, on another day, I might even have picked different books to the ones that I've picked for today. And in fact, the reason I've picked today's books is because each of them approaches storytelling in a unique way or creates something very special with your children. And I think you'll understand what I mean as I go along. And the first story, and they're in no particular order, but the first one is not even a story. There's not a story to this book at all. And it's a book called You Choose, and you've probably heard of this one because it's an all-time great book to read to children. But there's no story. It's just every single page is a series of things for the child to choose. And it could be anything from what pet do you want? What hat do you want to wear? It's just that. It's pictures of things that you can choose from. And of course, there you go. That's where would you like to live? Yeah. What home would you choose? And of course, like most of us, you choose the space home, don't you? Because who doesn't want to live in space? But of course, my daughter, she would have chosen a totally different home. And there's no right or wrong. That's the best thing about this book. It's not about the book. The book is brilliant, but that's not the big deal here. The big deal is the experience you have with your child when you're reading this. The shared moment together where you're picking things, you're laughing together, and you're genuinely interested in the brilliant pictures. So it's a book with no story, but it creates a wonderful bond with your children. And we now know that decision making in early years can help to prepare the child for decision making as an adult. And in fact, we now know that children who experience lots of decision making and choices as a child, when they are comfortable making those choices, it leads to increased leadership skills in later life. So it's actually a really important book for development, but that's not why I've chosen it. I've chosen it because of that unique moment where you sit together, huddled up, picking what your favourite things are. So the next book, a completely different book. And again, it's one you've probably heard of. It's Guess How Much I Love You. Probably one of the most emotive and just lovely books ever written. But again, I don't think it's the book that's the important bit. I mean, don't get me wrong, it couldn't happen without the brilliant writing. But what I think makes this book absolutely unique is that moment when you read it to your child. And I genuinely think that parents and carers reading this, and key workers as well, reading it to your children, I think you'll remember that experience even when your children are in their 30s. I think it's one of those unique moments of shared bonding. And basically, without spoiling the book, it's about a parent and their child, and the parent is just telling the child how much they love them. That's all it is. But whilst you're reading it, what you're really doing is you're showing your child how much you love them. And the spoiler at the end is, I love you to the moon and back. And that's what your child is fundamentally being told when you share that moment with them. And I don't think that there are many experiences that come close to that just wonderful shared moment of love between a parent and their child. And this book just encapsulates it all. So if you've never read this book to your child, I urge you to do it because it fundamentally tells your child they're loved. And it's a lovely book as well with some great pictures. So that approaches it in a completely different way, but it's all about the experience, okay? So while we're looking at the experience, a bit of a weird one for you. Dr. Seuss, If I Ran the Circus. Now, it's not one of the most famous Dr. Seuss ones, things like Green Eggs and Ham and, all the other stuff that you've heard of. This is one of the more obscure ones. And I think on a more personal level, I love this book because Dr. Seuss, when he wrote this, you could just feel the joy. And it's joy in language. It's joy in tongue twisters. It's joy in words that trip over each other. It's a very challenging book to read to children, actually. If you really go for it, it is very, very difficult. But there's something intensely joyful about reading it to your child. So this one is great for children. Children love it. But almost it's as rewarding as the adult reading it, which is quite rare for a children's book. So I'm going to just take one page at random. Probably, actually, I say random, I picked it in advance, so you could see the bookmark. But it's actually very difficult to read, so just bear with me on this. But this just shows how much this guy loved language. So here it is. Oh, but the story is that this child is imagining what it would be like if he ran the circus. And he starts off with moderately mundane things, but it gets more and more extravagant till by the end of it, the most incredible things. But he's there's this one guy that he knows, and he's basically giving him all the jobs in the circus. It's all in his imagination, but he thinks this guy can do everything. So the guy is called Sneelock, just in case it doesn't make sense at the end. So, and while that goes on there, look at this go on here. Have you heard of my herd of through horns jumping deer? Every deer jumps through horns of another pell-mell, while his horns are jumped through at the same time as well, by a deer whose horns also are being jumped through, by another who's having his horns jumped through too, which I'm sure Trainer Sneelock can train them to do. I don't know what it is, there's something delightful about that language, the through jumping, all of these, and the picture of course is all these deer trying to jump through each other's horns. And it's all completely fantastical. It's all in his imagination. But honestly, read it. Try and read it to children. The joy in the language. Now, we now know that if you can get children to see language as a positive construct, so they see the joy, they see an adult showing joy in language, it actually speeds up their acquisition of communication language in the first place. So books like this, and if this doesn't float your boat, other books though that show how language can be used for fun, we now know these are absolutely vital for your children developing communication language. And remember, at the moment, we're actually in a bit of a crisis in terms of children's communication language. So books like this are perfect, and any book, in fact, where they can see the adult absolutely loving the language. And that I think is what Dr. Seuss does more than anything. All right, so we're moving on. Again, a complete departure, and no surprise to the people who know me, The Dinosaur That Pooped a Planet, one of the all-time greats. I think if this book wasn't about poo, it should be up for a literary award. I think it is brilliant. And what is amazing about this, and actually similar to the Dr. Seuss stuff, because it was written by songwriters. They were in a band, weren't they? It was Busted or McFly, one of those bands. Anyway, I'm so sorry if I've offended the fans, but it was one of those bands, and they were in the band, and they've written it as if it was a lyrical creation. So the rhyming structure is some of the best you will get in any book. And you don't notice that because you're busy reading it to children, but genuinely, you go through it, it trips off the tongue. It's like a joy to read this book. And then, of course, it's all about poo. This is a moment of laughter and joy for your children that is second to none. And in fact, if you read this to a big group, if you read it to like your classroom, if you're a teacher, the page, you know, the one I'm talking about, where you get all the children shouting poo at the top of their voice, that's not a child disengaging in literacy, is it? That's not a child thinking that stories are just something that's done to someone, done to them rather than something they can be part of. That is a child fully engaged in the storytelling process. And I know it's about poo, but you have to stop being so precious about that, because for your young children, poo is funny, and we've just got to get over that and get on with it. You don't expect biting political satire from a 3-year-old. They're going through stages of humour. And let's be honest, a lot of adults find poo funny as well. So just to illustrate the lyrical quality of this book and just how amazing it is lyrically, this is the bit where, if you don't know the story, the dinosaur just eats everything and then just poos it all out again. That's literally the story. I know it shouldn't be as good as it is, but this is how good the lyrical quality is. With the feeling of guilt deep down in its gut, its brain brewed a plan involving its butt. It knew there was only one thing it could do to get them back home. It needed to. And then you turn the page and you're greeted with that. That is 30 children screaming the word poo and loving stories. Or it's one child with you reading a story, giggling away because you've been able to shout the word poo really loudly. But did you hear how easily the rhyming structure tripped off the tongue? It is a work of art. This is genuinely. I know I sound like I'm going over the top. I love it. I absolutely love this book, and hats off to them. And there's several others in the series as well. So The Dinosaur That Pooped a Planet, absolutely amazing book. Do be aware, some people really don't like this book, and we've had parents complain about this book. And on Amazon, there is a review for this book, genuinely, that says, 1 star, do not buy this book, it is about poo. I mean, like, how did they not get that from the title? You'd think, but no, people genuinely don't like this book because it's being silly. Children need to be silly, and this is a great way to share that with your child. And actually, shared laughter, we know, is one of the most powerful things, not just for your children's mental health, but for yours as well. Okay, so we're coming to the end. It's only a short video, but my favourite book of all time, and most of you know this is my favourite book. I go on about this book a lot, and I am sorry for those who've had enough of me talking about this book, but it's The Day the Crayons Came Home, my all-time favourite book for reading with children. And my daughter loved this, my son loved this, but I have to say, I don't care, because I love this. I can read this book as an adult and still it makes me smile. So it's just a very simple premise. This is the sequel, so unusual for a sequel to be considered better than the first book. And don't get me wrong, the first book is amazing. That's not taken anything away from Drew DeWalt, who wrote this book. But the sequel is even better. I'm not kidding. It's some of the funniest bits of writing for children ever. The main first book was about all of Duncan's crayons are writing complaints letters to tell him, how much they've been overused. And it's basically just a bunch of angry crayons complaining. It's a really odd idea, but it works. But the sequel is crayons from all around the place writing him postcards. So it's more broad, and there's some incredible personalities. There's the hardest page you'll ever read to a child, and this genuinely the most difficult page for an adult to read, and I've done a separate video all about that, so look out for that one. But genuinely, I don't think there's any book that's ever been harder to read out loud than the one page in this book. There's even a glow-in-the-dark page. I mean, who doesn't love that? So there's lots of crayons, and I often read this at conferences, but this is a page I don't read. Maybe a bit controversial, I don't know. But this is Duncan's, a crayon complaining, but it's not Duncan's crayon. Duncan is the owner of the crayon. No, this is his younger brother's crayon. And I just love this. It makes me smile. Dear Mr. Duncan, I know I'm not your crayon. I know I belong to your baby brother. But I can't take him any more. In the last week alone, he's bitten the top of my head, put me in the cat's nose, drawn on the wall, and tried to colour rubbish with me. The worst part is, he is a terrible artist. I can't tell what his drawings are. Donkeys, monkeys, donkey monkeys. Picasso said that every child is an artist. Well, I don't know. I don't think he met your brother. Please rescue me, your desperate friend, Big Chunky Toddler Crayon. You have to do him posh. I don't know why. That's where my voice goes. But that book, it's full of the most amazing personalities. It's full of these fantastic crayons. Honestly, Esteban the Magnificent, best crayon ever. There should be t-shirts with Esteban the Magnificent on. And if you want a book that gives you as much pleasure as it does your children and gets your children shouting out loud, then yeah, The Day the Crayons Came Home. The Day the Crayons Quit is amazing. That would be top 10 as well, but this is even funnier. So that's it. That's my weird choices for books, my favourite books to read to children. Each of them had a very different angle and different way to appeal to your children. But actually, sometimes it's not even the book. Sometimes it doesn't matter what story you're reading to your children. It's the simple act of sharing that moment with your children that's important. Sometimes just making up your own stories can be just as good as the stories that you buy. And on that thought, I'll leave you all. Do have a really good National Storytelling Week, and do let me know what your favourite children's books are, and hopefully I'll see you on another video. See you later.